Well, welcome everybody. I see a few people are still coming in, but I might as well kick off. I'm delighted to see you all here. This is a DEFI event for the new Digital Education Futures Initiative at Cambridge. We're trying to do implementation research that'll actually make a difference in education. And so we're delighted to present today the findings of what I think is quite an exciting project that's been funded by BT and Huawei, the Virtual Internship Project, we called it. But of course, that was before everyone started doing virtual internships. So now we're calling it the Simulated Virtual Internship Project, because it's a form of pedagogy. It's not just a virtual internship. In a minute, Louis Major and Alison Twiner, who worked on the project with me, will tell you more about it. But just now, I want to welcome everybody. We have people from all over the world, and we will be recording this. We've had interest from at least 100 registrants. Doesn't look like they've all turned up yet, but we will be recording this so that everyone can see it later. We have a very eminent panel who are going to discuss the potential of this project going forward, because what we're going to do is present what we found out, which is a kind of proof of concept of this approach to education, and then launch a new social enterprise, which we'd like you to support to see if you're interested or able. And our panel, very sorry, I'm here at Cambridge, not too far from the airport, which doesn't usually get a lot of traffic, so I'm sorry about that plane going by. Our panel are going to help us discuss the potential of this new approach to education and explore some of its, perhaps some of its limitations and whether or not they think it'll be effective, how we can implement it. I'll introduce them later. I have to ask if you could, I think Barry's going to put up a question, if you could please agree to share the attendance list so that we can build something of a community. So I think you have to, if a question comes up, please answer yes. That's right. Oh yeah, share your, and I will of course click yes as well. Because we hope, obviously, our aim is to be as dialogic as possible. Please put questions in the chat and don't hesitate to answer questions there. And we'll be discussing these questions a bit later when I introduce the panel. But first, as I said, Louis Major, Dr. Louis Major is going to introduce the context of the project. Then Dr. Alison Twiner, who is our leading researcher on the project, will share what we found out, and then we'll move on to look at the larger vision. Over to you, Louis.
Thanks, Rupert. And just to confirm that you can see the screen okay, it's a big picture of the screen. Is that okay? Brilliant. Thanks for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to speak with the audience today. My name's Louis Major. I'm a Senior Research Associate in the Faculty of Education and also Principal Researcher for DEFI. And as Rupert said, Alison, Rupert and I will be presenting on research that's investigating an approach to enable young people to better engage with the world of work. And this has been undertaken in collaboration with colleagues from BT and Huawei, and of course our teachers and learners, and it's involved developing and testing a new model of what we call simulated virtual internships to bridge the world of education and enterprise. So Rupert's already kind of said this. I'm going to give a brief overview and a rationale. Alison's going to give a summary of the project findings. And then Rupert is going to talk about having proved the concept, where to next for the project. And please do use the chat for any thoughts, reflections, questions, and the team will do their best to consider. So prompted by the new possibilities that digital technology opens up for education, as well as societal and economic factors, education stands at a time of change. And surveys of those in education and industry tell a pretty consistent story. We need to empower learners in order to enable them to succeed in a rapidly changing future world. And it's widely recognised, if occasionally disputed, that education today should include for the future skills. And this is the complex competencies of, for instance, communication, collaboration, and teamwork, creativity and design, and problem solving. Interest in how to better integrate education with real world context also continues to grow. For instance, how we might address the challenge of traditional curricula often struggling to authentically engage learners and young people with the world of work. However, we do remain unsure of how to provide a meaningful bridge between schools and enterprise. So exploring how to establish this bridge then, particularly in areas of social mobility, was one focus of the Virtual Internship Project. And this was a collaboration involving Cambridge and colleagues from industry leaders, BT and Huawei. Educating, well, the aim was, as Rupert mentioned, to develop a proof of concept future education approach that involves learners engaging with real-world projects and encouraging authentic links to the world of work. And it effectively involved developing this model of what we call simulating virtual internships. So this involves teams effectively simulating being interns in one of these major industry leaders, role-playing workplace practices and responding to meaningful workplace challenges. And I'll talk shortly about the design-based research approach that we took to do this. So the idea of simulated virtual internships then can be traced back to many key theoretical perspectives. For instance, the idea that learning is a social process mediated by a range of cultural tools. We were particularly influenced by work on situated learning and the idea of mantle of the expert. And together, these kind of came together to enable a simulation of situatedness, basically involving learners taking on the role of an expert, such as an engineer, to problematize a challenge. And research by Williamson Shaffer and colleagues at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we've got David on the call and part of the panel today, was particularly influential. While our instantiation of virtual internships differed in several ways, we were hugely influenced by this work, as we have been by many other colleagues, including Manoli, who we're also lucky to have on the call. And she's done a lot of work on designing pedagogy to support collaborative creativity. However, we needed to know more, particularly as such research was novel in a UK context. But it's not just the research need for the project. There were also important policy motivations too. And this line of work also complements other initiatives. For instance, the Department for Education's careers strategy, and this, which was launched in 2017. And this stipulates, for example, that every student in years 7 to 13, so ages 11 to 18, should have at least one employer encounter every year, including with some STEM employers. And this report also highlights data that a majority of 16-year-olds are currently dissatisfied with the careers education that they receive in schools. And much cited in that Department for Education strategy were these, the Gatsby Foundation's 8 benchmarks of good career guidance. So these were intended to set a standard of excellence for careers education. And they're part of a changing climate in the UK, at least. Schools and colleges now must publish details of their careers programme, and they must demonstrate how they prepare learners for future workplace success. And arguably, 3 benchmarks in particular relate to the idea of simulated virtual internships. And we've got 4, linking curriculum learning to careers, 5, encounters with employees and employers, and 6, experience of workplaces. And then just one other government initiative. The research was also aligned with this, the launch of 12 education opportunity areas, which the government in England had identified as hotspots of low social mobility. And the specific aim of these opportunity areas was to build young people's knowledge and skills and provide them with the best advice and opportunities, including experience working with enterprise. And we worked in 2 opportunity areas, Derby and Fenlands in East Cambridgeshire. So in sum then, the last few slides are intended to demonstrate that while there's an important research need, there is also important educational and policy needs too, with the project intended to address. So you're probably wondering then, what do these simulated virtual internships in classroom actually look like? Well, our instantiation kind of involved 3 key features. A focus on challenge-based learning, which is a form of inquiry-based learning, which involves providing a framework for learning involving solving authentic real-world problems, which were proposed in partnership with BT and Huawei. Second, a focus on the key complex competencies which are often emphasised by employers, in particular collaboration and creativity, building on resources generated at the Faculty of Education over many years. And 3, authentic curricular links to the world of work. So as I've mentioned, learners role-playing different roles and responding to authentic challenges, And the industry partnership that we had with BT and Huawei also informed the development of resources. So, for instance, induction videos, work-based tasks, and structured authentic evaluation criteria. Further summary on this slide, I think I've touched on most of the points. Small teams, learners being tasked with an authentic problem. We worked in computing and DT because we felt that this is the area of the curriculum that was most aligned to the project. We used digital technology and some further information on there. In sum, I mean, simulated virtual internships are intended to be as real as they can be in a teacher facilitated classroom setting. But as Rupert mentioned at the outset, this is about the pedagogy, how to bring in the wider work community as opposed to, true virtual internships in their, in the truest sense. And Jonathan, who we've got in a panel from BT, I remember him discussing this very useful conceptualization of industry and engagement, industry and education engagement at the outset of the project. That there are arguably 4 ways for industry to engage with education: work encounters, which might be a one-off talk or careers fair; workplace experience, for maybe a site visit; work experience in the traditional sense, a couple of weeks work experience; or industry placements, which might be a full internship. Our conjecture at the outset was that we should be able to do one, somewhere between a workplace encounter and a workplace experience, but we believe that a more dynamic employer encounter was possible, somewhere between workplace experience and work experience. But just to say, and just to stress actually, that simulated virtual internships at this stage at least are a complement to in-person work experience and not necessarily a replacement. And just very quickly, just before I pass over to Alison, a quick mention about our methodological framework. We took a design-based research approach, which integrated qualitative and qualitative methods. Design research, as we've got on the slide, intends to solve real-world educational problems, in addition, rigorously, basically. And it's arguably one response, which I really like this quote from James Paul Gee in David's 2017 quantitative ethnography book, where he talks about education not being a hard science, but a hard science. Humans are complex systems, put them inside other complex systems, and that complexity grows. We undertook design-based research because we wanted to understand how and why it works, not just if it works. And final slide from me. Conceptualizing DBR can be difficult, and this is kind of an attempt. Start in the middle with an analysis of the existing theory and the requirement, or eliciting the requirements from the learners, going through an iterative cycles of design. And this is based on Beam's spiral model of software development, starting with a small number of schools and then expanding out. And we're kind of here now on the operational design bit. COVID unfortunately did mean that we weren't able to scale massively beyond our original cohort. Obviously, it's been incredibly tough for schools, teachers and learners. But nonetheless, given the nature of design-based research and the other work that we've undertaken alongside this, we have gained some very valuable insights. And on that note, I'm going to pass over to Alison, who will talk about the methodology and the findings.
Thanks very much, Louis. I will, assuming everyone can hear me now, and share for you and get going on that. Okay, great. So as Louise mentioned, we adopted a design-based research framework within the project. And I've put up on the screen here what that looked like in practice, what we actually did across the different iterations and phases. Of course, the iterative nature, very important in design-based research. So we initially drew on our existing experiences, rigorous research in the faculty around supporting such future skills and group work and collaboration, and how to support that in educational practice. We also worked collaboratively with our industry partners in BT and Huawei, as well as with the teacher researchers, to develop this program of resources to implement over a half-term period with students. We then ran the first iteration, observed it, gathered data in a variety of forms, which we'll address in a couple of moments. We were enabled to evaluate those resources and revise and create additional ones for the second iteration. And unfortunately, the start of iteration 2 was when COVID lockdown initially hit. and the brakes were put on a lot of things in terms of in-school practice. We were still able to collect some data, gather some reflections, and one participating school were able to run phase 2 through various different lockdowns and restrictions. So we gathered different data than we might have initially expected and hoped, but were still able to maintain some momentum on the project with students and teachers. One thing we turned into an opportunity was in developing a relatively self-contained eDelphi study as to explore the wider issues around introducing such a program and an approach with experts in different international contexts in areas of industry, educational research and educational practice. And I'll come back to that in a few moments. So in terms of what we did in school then, we devised 2 versions of the program for the computing and design and technology curricula in Key Stage 3. And the program was implemented with 17 classes in 4 schools with over 300 students involved overall. And we gathered data in a number of forms from a number of different perspectives, and we'll draw on findings from across those data sources over the next few minutes. So as Louis mentioned, then we used experience and resources developed in previous projects within the faculty to devise this really rigorous professional development resource pack to share with teachers in guiding the approach and ensuring that these future skills were embedded within the program to support the development of collaboration and communication alongside the skills of design and as students responded to the challenges. The challenges were introduced to students via really important video resources that our colleagues at BT and Huawei provided for us, which offered that real authentic link and situated these scenarios within genuine workplace contexts and offered that work experience and work flavour to the students, as well as being voiced in that frame. And various of these videos were filtered through the half-term period around the challenges of digital divides and energy efficiency. So these global challenges that students responded to. We created a student logbook for the second iteration based on feedback and evaluation of iteration 1. There's a space for the students to, excuse me, reflect on their work and keep everything together, and also a place for teachers to monitor and observe progress as they were working through, so that the focus wasn't entirely on one final learning outcome of the group. And we offered various resources as well to support the process, including this one, which was informed and adapted by, I think, one of BT's evaluation criteria, and the students used this to evaluate the solution they came up with in their groups. So we used various different forms of analysis to explore the different data sources in accordance with the type of data that we were collecting, so suited to the quantitative and qualitative lenses. And the analysis overall was in response to our overarching research question to explore in what ways and how the programme of virtual internships enabled the students we were working with to feel this real sense of the world of work, what options were available, and also to develop these key future and technical skills along the way and see the value of them. So across, to give an overview of general findings in terms of the students then across data sources, we were able to observe and gain reflections that the students, as in their groups, did create unique responses to their challenges around digital divides and energy efficiency that reflected their context and their interests. So there were various comments that the students came up with ideas and solutions the teachers hadn't thought of. Each group was able to do something different, and the teachers were empowered to support them in this. Particularly from the surveys, we noticed that the students saw the importance of group work, and they did start to use some of the strategies to bring this into their practice and into their work together. They did gain useful insights into workplaces and challenges and contexts through the global challenges they were presented with, and increase their understandings of the skills needed and crucially of having some of these. So just to dive in a bit to the survey data, we gathered retrospective pre and post student survey data. So these were administered after the students had completed their virtual internships, and the students were presented with these 8 statements and asked to think how they felt about them 2 months ago before they started their internship, and then afterwards. So the pre and post measures were conducted at the same time, thinking back. And whilst we worked with, the program was implemented with over 300 students, unfortunately, due to COVID, we were only able to gather survey responses from those who participated in iteration 1. So just over 80 students completed the survey. In terms of average responses, we can see that there was an increase from pre to post judgment across all of the 8 statements we put to them, which of course is promising. In terms of statistical significance, these were statements were judged on a Likert scale. The students gave both pre and post responses for themselves. So we used the Wilcoxon related samples ranked sign test to address significance of these positive increases. And all but one statement showed a statistically significant increase from pre to post. And in fact, the most positive increase, or the most significant increase, was this first question, which has just disappeared, sorry. What I learn on doing computing and D&T will be important for me in the future, which of course was really promising to see. So diving into the detail a little more, we appreciate the limitations of presenting quotes in terms of such a large project. We just wanted to offer a flavour and humanise the experience a little. So when asked one student in the focus group to describe the project, what it's about, she said, making a difference, and that sense of really gaining an experience and enabling the students to feel that they could do something. They have options and opportunities going forward. In terms of the teachers then, we found that through the resources and through the use of the resources with their students, they were empowered to broker these experiences with their students in addition to any face-to-face elements, while still maintaining their role as the subject leads and subject experts, and enabled them to show the relevance of these skills and these tasks for the future. That's exemplified a little in this quote here, where this was a teacher responding after phase 2, so during COVID lockdown and restrictions, how they really contextualized the importance of the collaboration that was embedded in the program and how relevant that was to the world of work. So of course, we acknowledge there were various limitations to the project. COVID absolutely changed the plan that we wanted to commit to. We did work intensively with the lead research schools, but we weren't able to scale up and work with more teachers and schools along the way. We also acknowledge, of course, researcher effects in terms of the specific questions that we asked and being in a room whilst teachers and students were working to implement a new program. And we acknowledge the impact that may have on the findings. But what we did do and take as an opportunity was creating this eDelphi study. So this was conducted entirely online with experts, as I say, in fields of industry, educational practice and educational research, broadly around this large question to explore the wider issues. So there were 3 rounds to the study. Rounds 1 and 2 were anonymous and asynchronous, and 71 participants or panel members took part across the 3 rounds. So the first round was was opening up basically, and we asked panel members to respond to these 8 questions, very broad questions. From that, we used thematic analysis to filter down and create 18 statements, which we then put back to panel members in round 2 to respond to in terms of their agreement and perceived importance of these statements. These were based on common and contentious issues from the round 1 data across the different responses. I think we had about 400 responses across it all. And as you can imagine, responses to the statements varied in terms of some, there was quite a high degree of agreement. And for others, there was a lot more range and spread of expert opinions. And of course, we weren't using this to force agreement. but to explore the difference of opinions and views within the field. And that's why in round 3, we opened it up and brought perspectives into dialogue through 4 design workshop discussions to explore these issues by bringing panel members together, and 20 participants took part in that phase of the study. So overall then, despite many challenges, including those brought about by COVID, we feel that we demonstrated proof of concept, which has potential for impact through scalable resources to support students in having authentic experiences of the world of work. We've demonstrated flexibility of the approach to engage students in a range of digital and social contexts. The eDelphi was valuable to shed light on wider issues in international contexts. And through this, we claim that the simulated virtual internships acts as a complement to any face-to-face engagement with employers, but still enables schools to meet the Gatsby requirements. Facilitating teachers to be at the center of this and to enable the pedagogy is really critical to making it contextualized and relevant to their students. I've presented a summary of results given time, but Rupert, is going to continue in terms of how we're taking this work forward. So I'll hand back to Rupert now.
Oh, thanks very much, Alison. I better immediately share my screen to move on to the vision thing, where we're trying to go with this. So what we think we've done, despite, as I say, some of the problems that came in with COVID, is demonstrate an approach that works. And this is important because we think it has significance for education generally. So we're now moving into a social enterprise phase. We're calling what we have to offer scenarios plus simulated virtual internships. And we're hoping that it can serve as a catalyst for change within education. It seems that one of the big issues with education, it's not just me saying this, I read a lot of European Union reports and other government reports around the world, is what could be called producer capture. You know, when it's a business studies term for when companies become so preoccupied with their own internal criteria that they're no longer really serving the clients, as it were. And if you ask any children what they're doing in secondary schools, they'll almost invariably say, well, we're preparing for exams, or we have to do this for these exams, and so on. And of course, I'm not saying the exams aren't valuable in some respects, but it's as if the system itself has taken over the purpose of what education is. And we think education is much larger than that. And the study that we've conducted here shows the potential for linking classrooms and current education with the real world outside. We have obviously 2 examples from our generous supporters, British Telecom and Huawei, dealing particularly with engineering and the world of work. But the same principle could be applied to any other real world organization. There are many organizations, NGOs, civic groups, and government bodies, the police, for example, who are very keen on working with schools and producing materials. And we think we have provided a simple way of delivering that connection, which will enhance education at the same time as providing a service, as it were, to all those groups who are interested in producing materials and working with schools. So linking schools with the rest of the world. And this is really important because children tend to make decisions about what they're going to do between the ages of 10 and 14. So we're moving, normal internships tend to occur, 16, 17, much later on. So we're moving this experience earlier. And when I say it's experience, it's simulated experience, it's very much about the imagination. And this is what you learn from programs like Mantle of the Expert. Education isn't just about narrow cognitive skills or passing exams. It's about identity. It's about being able to imagine yourself as a useful and effective member of society, not only in terms of work, but also in citizenship and in terms of just living a fulfilled life. And at the moment, many people say that the current curriculum is a little bit too narrow, and this is a way of opening it up. As I said in my early slide, it's not so much turning schools inside out as bringing the outside in. And we mentioned design-based research, but part of what design-based research does is not only demonstrate if something works and how and why it works, as Louis said, it also produces a tried and tested set of materials. So we've kind of produced a template here, which I'll explain shortly, which will enable enterprises and schools to work together. The template can be described very simply, as I think Alison and Louis have pointed out, that we have some videos, we can script them from a CEO or other. I'm going to show you a picture of Lisa Perkins from BT in a minute, who's the head of research at Astral Park, setting out the challenge, explaining the context, in this case, the Internet of Things, setting out the challenge for the young people. And we also, as well as that initial video, we have extra videos on important issues that we want them to realize, such as collaboration and resilience. We have a series of videos from engineers at Huawei and at British Telecom explaining how they solve problems and how they design things. And this, of course, would apply for any real-world organization we were working with. And we also need criteria for judging the final solution or product that the young people produce. And we add to that, of course, our rather large experience of producing materials for thinking together, as we tend to call it, collaborative learning, problem solving, and designing products. So we have a whole set of tried and tested lessons. And as I said, the point of design-based research is to try these out with teachers in real context and to show that they work. Here's just to illustrate the sort of thing. Again, this is, as I mentioned, this is Lisa Perkins, I think she's head of research at Astral Park for British Telecom. She's setting out the challenge for the young people. In case it wasn't totally clear from our earlier presentations, this is essentially what we do. The CEO or other senior person lays out the challenge. They work together in teams to research it, to create possible solutions, to test and develop that, and then to present their solution to an audience. Hopefully that audience will be the members of the real world organization we're working with, but we don't need them to be there because we want these resources to be scalable. So as long as they share their criteria, this can be proxied by a teacher or other person. And then of course the CEO returns to thank them for their efforts. What we're trying to do here is give real world context and significance to the work that's going on in schools. So we think that's more than just a project. We think this is a possible catalyst for opening schools up to the real world. And we're trying to create a platform where we can match together teachers and classrooms with real world organizations. We can provide this template to produce a scheme of work, say 10 lessons for an hour over a term, which can fit into the curriculum to enhance the education, but also serve the interests of the real world organization. So we think this has potential as a catalyst for change in education. And to discuss that, we're delighted to have this very eminent panel who I'll introduce briefly before we get them to tell us what they think about the project and its potential. We have Professor David Williamson Shaffer, who in many ways originated this idea, although we've adapted it and developed it for the context. The Villas Distinguished Professor of Learning Sciences from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Joe Shillingford, who was a great help, one of our teachers on the project and careers lead at Chellaston Academy. Jonathan Leigh-Smith, who's head of scientific affairs at BT. Manoli, who's we worked with a lot in the past, professor at Yale University, who has a lot of experience in these kind of projects. And also Pallavi Malhotra, who was one of the first female telecommunications engineers in the UK. And I think she used to work for BT, but she's now a director of the Huawei ICT Academy program. So hopefully our panel are all here. I just want to kick off with a question to you, Joe, because you can give us a teacher perspective, which is so important. How did you find the program, and do you think these values can be applied more generally, as I've suggested? Were there any issues that we should be looking at in the context of real classrooms?
My students really enjoyed the project, to the point where students who didn't have a love of computing, actually when they finished the project they had a love of my subject, which for me is a massive positive in whatever we do. For students who are a little bit unkeen about a subject to actually love a subject following the project, that's a massive plus. One of the big positives is that students, I allowed students to put themselves into the group. So I didn't, this was the first run through. So I thought I'm asking them to do something completely different, something a little bit alien to them. So I wanted them to feel comfortable in the groups they were working in. And this allowed students to play to their strengths. So obviously, as they assigned each other a role or they agreed roles within the group, they were playing to their strengths, and everyone obviously had a role and everyone took part. But on the flip side of it, it also allowed some students to kind of hide away and get away with doing a little bit less than others. And what students didn't have the confidence to do at this age is to call people out and to challenge the lack of work within the group. And that's where I would have to come in and kind of give a bit of a helping hand to ease the kind of the problem within the group sometimes. So that's where they didn't have the confidence to do that. But obviously, I think as they grow and develop and they work through this in more subjects or year on year, that confidence to kind of say, that's not fair, you're not doing enough work, you haven't submitted your work to the deadline, that would come. They enjoyed the way of working. I think it was so new to them, the fact that they were having a problem delivered to them, and then they worked through the problem, they unpicked the problem, and they provided their own solution. At the end of the day, I didn't really do very much other than facilitate, to make sure they were on track, to make sure they understood what they were doing, to make sure that they were keeping to sort of deadlines. And what they were able to do is they decided on the outcome. I didn't dictate what they had to produce. The problem dictated that, and how they interpreted that problem and how they worked together as a team to overcome that problem was so nice. And obviously, I think they enjoyed being able to make their own decisions. They enjoyed being in control of their destiny, and they enjoyed being able to produce the solution. Obviously, they were limited on the software and the facilities we had at school, but on the whole, that didn't stop them. We had bits and bobs being brought in from home, and what it did allow us to do, and would be really nice and sort of would have worked through lockdown if we'd had that option at our school to do this, would the fact that they were collaborating at home anyway. They'd set themselves up little WhatsApp groups and they were chatting about it at home, and the homework that I sort of set would be to say, right, what do you have to have ready for next lesson? What as a team do you need? You need to work on that over the course of the next week or the next 10 days until we meet again. And that was really nice. The fact that they didn't have to do the homework on their own, they could collaborate and work together even outside of the classroom was really nice. So for me, I really want to continue this way of working. It suited me, it suited my students, and it's something that I think we can really develop, and it will allow us to enhance the experience in school.
Oh, well, that's really ringing endorsement. Thank you so much, Joe. But I can also assure everybody that Joe, of course, is an enthusiast, but we had some other teachers there who were pretty much, who told us, I can't remember his name, it was that guy who said he hated collaborative learning and he never did it. But with this project, we showed him how we could make it work, because that is our expertise. And now he loved it. We're not suggesting you should do this all the time, but it's a fantastic enhancement to the rest of the curriculum, because I think it gives it some meaning. I think that's what you're saying anyway. I hope so.
Yes, but also my subject lends itself to that kind of working as well, which is also very nice. And yes, certainly I think if we did it all the time, they'd become a bit bored and it'd become a bit norm. And the fact that it was a bit different was why they loved it.
Thanks. But then, so we are talking about, so we're actually building on the existing curriculum, and I say extending it by bringing in real world context. David, can I ask you if you think, because you were very much an inspiration for this, but your model was perhaps more transformatory, if I can say that's probably the wrong word, but do you think what we're doing is compatible in some way with your vision of how education should be for the future? Putting that to, yeah.
Well, yes, I do. I mean, I think that what this model is trying to do, well, was trying to do is proof of concept, and now is trying to scale up. Yeah. The idea that education doesn't have to be about the same things that it was about 100 years ago, that we don't have to do, English classes the way that we did them, and math classes the way that we did them, and even that we choose to do, history and some strange version of the sciences that aren't actually practiced anymore. And we know that those models are problematic, right? We still teach calculus in high school, and anybody you ask would say that linear algebra and statistics are much more important. In English, we read many of the same old books, but in any case, we're mostly reading books and poetry. We're not talking about song lyrics and all, and reports that people will write, and all the different ways of expressing themselves that'll happen in their life later on. So I think this does two things. One is it calls that question. It actually asks us to decide what we think should be included in every student's education up to a certain age. And I think that's a useful and important debate. And then I think it also provides a model of a mechanism going forward that could make some of those things a reality. And then could connect schools to the real world in a way that they haven't. And I appreciate you saying that this is that I provided some inspiration. For those who want to hear more about the inspiration, there's a book, How Computer Games Help Children Learn, which tried to lay out some of those ideas. But the idea that this project is doing, it goes back to Dewey, right? I mean, this is not a new idea. I think what you guys are doing is appropriately taking advantage of the technologies that weren't available when Dewey was writing to make that vision possible.
Oh, thanks, David. I've just got a question here I'd like to put to Pallavi, because as we mentioned, you were one of the first women engineers in telecommunications. And this is very significant because I actually did quite a big EU project, Science Education for Diversity. And we looked at the images that children had of engineering and of STEM subjects and scientists, and they were, well, pretty much based on Disney cartoons. So this actual experience and videos from people like Lisa, who's head of research. Anyway, what do you think about the possible impact on the gender issue of girls and women into STEM, Pallavi? Do you think this will work?
Yes, I think this is a fantastic initiative. And I think this is one way of getting schools to actually start engaging with industry and introducing the world of work to a younger age group. There are activities done at college and so on. But what we found is that, I started with British Telecom as one of the first female telecommunications engineers back in '76. In those days, girls were encouraged to go into home economics and cookery. We were never encouraged to actually take on any STEM type of subjects. And even now, from the communications that I've had with, through the work that I'm doing, it hasn't really moved forward very much since then. So there isn't enough encouragement. I believe we could provide a lot more encouragement to young girls right from a younger age to try and help them to understand the world of work, especially within the digital sector. What does the tech industry involve? What type of job roles are there? And if we can get young girls or all young people involved from a young age, but let's not restrict this activity just to year 7, year 8. I think this is a very valuable activity that should continue on, because as it does, and the more young people get engaged with dealing with real world type scenarios and problems, troubleshooting, and also engaging with people within those particular job roles, especially females who are in technology, then it's going to help with their confidence, really improve their confidence. And this is always going to be best for all parties. It's going to produce a more well-rounded young person. Not only is it just dealing with troubleshooting or the type of scenarios they would deal with, how to conduct themselves at meeting, but there are, like Huawei is an international company. We work with clients within the UK, in English-speaking countries, outside of English-speaking countries, internationally, and the customs are different. We're a bit different between countries. So they not only learn on how to conduct themselves, but also how to deal with different types of clients, how they should conduct themselves with the colleagues, within the company, and with clients. There's a different way of working. So this all really helps, and I think that it saves a lot of work on the employer's part when you get a well-rounded young person coming into. And this type of activity would definitely help girls to be well informed about the digital sector, and hopefully they will, as you mentioned earlier, Rupert, it helps them to make informed choices when they go into selecting their GCSE subjects and A-level subjects. And I love the term you use, bring the outside in. Definitely, I mean, you do need to do that, and I think a lot of this engagement should there should be a lot more of this engagement within the school sector, for sure.
Oh, thanks so much, Pallavi. And I really do appreciate the support that Huawei has given for educational projects generally. When I visited Shenzhen, and I think it was Holly was head of the corporate social responsibility branch, and they were just bringing in interns from Mauritania. They had internships in Shenzhen working with engineers from, I think, 197 countries in the world, which is pretty impressive, because there are only about 190. I mean, I hope I got it right, but it was everywhere, basically, including, I mean, I had hardly, Mauritania is not on everybody's map. What about you, Manoli? I mean, this is all being very positive. I suppose do please put in questions about challenges and difficulties, because it's quite easy to, we'll come on to any ethical issues a bit later. But do you agree in terms of this potential to bridge the gender divide in STEM, Manoli, or perhaps other issues of the different ability range of students and different types of students? Because you've done quite a lot of similar projects, I think.
Yeah, it's true. And congratulations
but
for
we
the
you did a
project.
brilliant one on cleaning up the pollution in the River Yeda.
Yeah. We were more focused on community problems, but I would like to highlight how this kind of pedagogy can help to change the learning atmosphere and the ethos of the classroom. When Joe was talking, I was pencil down things that change in the classroom. She was talking about confidence, engagement, enjoyable, making decisions. So these are aspects that we have also observed in our data and in our experience. And also we have seen that in this the changing in this learning atmosphere also change in a way in which those students that have diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, expertise, knowledge, are perceived as a value to solve their challenge rather than an obstacle. In this learning atmosphere, in this new learning atmosphere, we have seen that the participation of all students increases, and the fact to be seen as a valuable member of a team has a high impact on their cognitive and social development, because now all the students can be part of the social interactions that emerge during the group work, because they receive feedback, they receive rewards, they receive help. So in this type of project in which students are engaged, all students are engaged, all students can bring in the knowledge that they have, their experiences. These aspects increase the participation of all of the students. And we also have seen high rates of exploratory talk features in which students ask questions to each other. Students can can discuss about what are the processes that they have to follow to fulfill the challenge. So in some way, students learn together, learn from each other, and knowledge from each other, processes for each other ways of thinking. And also when the instructional design focuses on these aspects, we have seen that the teachers can have an active role and can develop or can make actions in the direction to change this learning atmosphere, to value the diversity of ideas, diversity of knowledge, diversity of experiences. And we have done quite a lot, and we have focused on this, for example, designing a specific instructional materials in which teachers and students explicitly value the importance of collecting different types of ideas to solve different stages of the problem. And also what we have done also is about designing instructional materials that structure and resource the problem-solving processes in the form of phases, steps, or techniques that can make thinking more visible and thus facilitate group discussion and peer scaffolding processes. So this kind of project and this kind of pedagogy, we think it's a great advance in promoting cognitive and social development of all students. And I think this is a big step forward to include all the members of the community of the classroom in solving a challenge.
Wow, it's great, and hopefully perhaps we could share, if we get our platform going, it might be effective with your schools and networks in Spain as well as in the UK, and hopefully globally. Because one thing we should have said, and we're working in opportunity areas where it was actually quite difficult to get ordinary work experience anyway, and it's very expensive, it's very hard for teachers to organize. I think Joe will agree with me. So this is actually an opportunity for leading edge global companies to allow children to, in a sense, have the experience of working with them from anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to be in Norfolk or in near Leeds and the schools we were using. It could be anywhere, potentially. But Jonathan, I know you have a lot of experience of education, but of course you also represent BT, which is a global cutting-edge telecommunications company. Do you think this project can, in a sense, offer something of value to real-world organizations like yourself? And why is it that so many organizations do seem to want to get into schools? Will we have a market? Will there be a social enterprise business here, do you think? What's your view?
Yes, absolutely. I believe there's value in this, and I was fortunate enough to be involved in the formation of this program. I changed roles, and I'll go back to that in just a minute. So I haven't been able to see it all the way through, but I get here to listen to the results. I mean, absolutely, it has a role at the practical level, and actually, yes, it can make a difference, I believe, in terms of helping organisations get involved in supporting schools and supporting young people. Most, I think, people would like to do it. They struggle with how to do it and how to do it effectively. But if I go back to my role, a few years ago, my job title wouldn't lead you to this, but I also ran BT's regional school engagement program out of our R&D headquarters near Ipswich, a place called Adastral Park. So this is the on-the-ground engagement, and BT had a national program as well. And we had a number of objectives. Actually, Joe mentioned computing. BT was influential, I like to think, in terms of getting the government to put computing onto the curriculum, which was our gift to schools. And of course, schools were looking at going, particularly primary schools, going, great, this is a subject we've never taught before, and we were never taught ourselves. What are we supposed to do about that? So one of our objectives was to help schools deliver this new curriculum. And of course, computing is directly relevant to that, to us. But we had a number of things. Gender diversity, that's already, Pallavi has already talked about that very eloquently. That was very important to us, I guess, hopefully it's self-evident. Where we're at, we have about 3,500 employees based at Adastral Park. So this is our community. We live here, our friends are here, our families are here. So we want to see the education system we want to help as best we can. But we're also looking at recruitment. So we hire more apprentices than we do grads. So there's the pipeline there. And of course, there's reputation. You know, at a local level, we're keen that BT is recognised for our contribution to the environment. So we shouldn't put that to one side. So anyway, and one other thing, you know, from a community point of view, Ipswich is one of the opportunity areas. I sit on the programme board for the Ipswich opportunity area. You talked about it's hard to get involved. The observant might have noticed there is no Ipswich school involved, despite me being on the board. And that's a whole story in its own right. You know, the complexities of engaging, but I won't go to that. Anyway, I was managing a programme, and about the time I handed to my colleague, Carol Fletcher, who really deserved to be here, to be honest, we were engaging with about 50 schools in the region. We had tens of thousands of school engagements. I built up a sort of a portfolio of activities. Louis put the sort of 4 levels that I sort of settled out in my mind about encounters through to internships. So we have a level of engagement that we were trying to operate across all of that. But being in research at the same time, I was looking at this and going, well, I've got 2 things I want to do with this program, because it was a large enough program, to be honest. But there were 2 things. One was improving the quality of it, making sure we really were making a difference. So that was a constant thing. But the other thing was the scale of it. 50 sounds large, and tens of thousands of engagements sounds large when you're talking to executives and when you're sitting across a table with other industry partners. But if you're on the ground, of course, it's pretty much nothing. You know, there's 30 odd schools in Ipswich alone, a few hundred in Suffolk, and the number I always loved with me, Norfolk and Suffolk, there are 900 schools, right? So 50 is nothing. And that's one of the things I was interested in, which is how do we provide meaningful engagements with young people, but at scale, not at the level that makes us feel good, but at the level that is actually making a difference in the local community. And the problem we faced was we had maxed out. I wasn't entirely sure how we could do much more, because with any organisation, it is volunteer-based. If we take work experiences, we'd take about 150 placements in a year. And really and we had 3,500 people, and for various reasons, that's sort of as much as we could do. The logistics of doing that is so high, you can't get much beyond that. So at the time that colleagues from Huawei and I met yourselves, I was sitting there thinking, how can we scale these things up? And so the idea of being able to take a workplace sort of experience into the classroom was already something we were starting to think about. I mean, in a sense, you can reach that conclusion easily, but how you go about that and maintain that as a meaningful experience, well, clearly totally unqualified for that. So do I believe it's important to us? Yes, if we're going to sort of have an impact at real scale at the community level. Do I think it will be relevant to other organisations? Well, yes, because this is a way of actually doing something without, well, in a sense, well, I'd like to think a relatively easy way of actually contributing and achieving many of the benefits I was talking about and others have talked about without, if you like, the physical effort of the sheer number of volunteers and warm bodies you need to be able to do that.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. And I like your last point, because DEFI, the Digital Education Futures Initiative at Hughes Hall, Cambridge, is particularly wanting to explore new possibilities of education that are now made possible by the internet. And I think this is one of them, this ability to scale, because once we have this template in place, we could run a similar program in any school. And it's only because of the connectedness of the internet that makes that possible. So I think it's something new that we're doing here, at least I hope so. But it just struck me, we've been very positive, but one question that we've received from Iona Nula, who I hope is here, who sent in this question, is about the risks, about the dangers. And I wondered if as a panel we could address those, because obviously there are perhaps ethical issues raised. I don't know who would like to say something about that. Perhaps I could. Perhaps David, you have some views on the risks and the issues that we should be addressing here, or Joe maybe. I mean, what could you mentioned a few downsides with the group work, but I think we can make that work. Anyone want to comment on risks or ethical issues and dilemmas?
Rupert, I'm happy to say a few more words. Ethical questions I'm not sure about. I mean, ethic, that's a broad area. But things like safeguarding, that sort of thing, and indeed ensuring that that everybody gets the opportunity to engage, because I guess if you've been involved in it, the children, the young people who come to events, sometimes there can be a degree of self-selection, and you can't do much about that as an employer. It's very hard to deal with that. So one is the ability to remove any sort of potential bias about who's actually getting on the coach and coming to us. So that helps by putting it into the classroom. The other side is, and I talked about the effort involved, the logistics. So, work experience, 150, you've got all of the safety aspects around that to manage and keep an eye on. Large events, when you bring them in, risk management plans, taking into account absolutely every potential outcome there might be, any sorts of special needs, ensuring everybody has a chance. All of those can be dealt with, but those things do provide a limitation on the scale. And again, I worry that they sort of became an impediment to certain people wanting to being able to come.
If I could build on that, Jonathan, I mean, one of the critiques that you either are getting or will get as you go along is that, a simulated internship is of the kind that you're describing isn't as good as a real internship, right? You're not actually at the company. You're not being seen by the employees in the company. You're not doing the things that are real, right? It's still in school and still with a teacher. My answer back to that is that, is the equity question that Jonathan just raised, right? It would be great if every student could have the experience to be interns at real companies, hopefully a variety of real companies and the ones that they could choose, but the math just doesn't work. So that means that this kind of experience is available to everyone and not just the few people who are lucky enough to get an internship. And I'm sure this doesn't happen at Huawei or BT, but our experience in studying internships was that interns often spend a lot of time filing papers and getting coffee, especially if they're in what we would call high school or middle school. If you're 14 years old, there's not that much you can do to really design a box skirt or bridge, right? And so this provides an opportunity in the simulated form to give students access to problems and challenges and do things that would be too expensive or too dangerous or simply are too rare for them to do when they're at a young age. And it gives the opportunity to provide a kind of pedagogical structure that's developed by and implemented by people who actually understand the pedagogical needs of kids at that age, teachers, and of course the designers of the curriculum. So I think from that sort of ethical point of view, this is actually giving a more equitable experience to students, and one that's going to be in some ways actually better than just doing internships. The flip side, though, is actually on the other side, which companies get engaged, and in what ways are they getting engaged? And by companies here, I guess I should say organizations. So which NGOs get engaged? Which community groups get engaged? Which industrial partners are there? That then becomes potentially shaping the curriculum, not in the way that it has traditionally been shaped, for better or for worse, but now as there's this potential to essentially sort of privatize the curriculum, right? And now the curricular decisions are getting made by who steps forward in the industrial and organizational landscape of the country or of the world. And I think that is a very serious ethical question. It's great to start with digital DT. I don't actually know what the acronym is, but to start with digital technologies because it's a pilot. But which ones do we do next? And how do we make that decision? That seems like it's a really big ethical issue.
Yeah, D&T is design and technology.
There you go.
That's really appropriate. And also computing, as you say, really appropriate and relatively uncontroversial, especially with the companies we're working with and promoting computing. But there could be much more controversial. I do remember, I don't know how long ago it was, but there was a bit of a scandal in America when McDonald's were involved in teaching food science or something like that. And would, you know, you could see that would raise issues. I don't know how we're going to handle that. Joe, do you got any thoughts about those ethical issues and how we should take it forward? Because we will need a strategy. We're starting small, but if this becomes a much bigger approach that's transforming education, these issues will be raised far more strongly, won't they?
For me, I can't see really any sort of ethical or real risks or dangers. I think for me, what it's been able to do is where we were based in Derby, and to get, you know, typically for us, you know, our big employers near us didn't offer the opportunities that students had through BT and Huawei, and we wouldn't have had that had we not been able to participate in the project. And actually, I chose to do it with my one group, but actually the next run through, the next iteration, we would hope to have run it with the whole year group. So actually a whole year group of 250 students would have been able to be involved in this project. Normally, we wouldn't get 250 students out of school to go anywhere. So for us, it was, you know, this has real value and real weight to be able to say to students, you're going to get an opportunity to work with two really, really huge employers, and they wouldn't get that opportunity in normal circumstances. And obviously, you know, all students got to take part. There wasn't a putting the names in the hat kind of thing. We've only got 15 places. How do we choose? We've got 250 students. How do we choose the 15? You know, we would go and make sure we had some SEN in there. We'd make sure we'd offered some PP students. And then there may be about 7 places left for others. So this way, everyone got to take part. And going forward, for me, this is one of the ways in which we can engage students in a much larger scale project without having to, like you say, go and get a coach, go and get them go and get consent forms, pack lunches, getting all of the logistics of trying to get students out of school. It's much easier doing it this way. And also having a project to do as well, that we can manage within the classroom is amazing too.
Oh, thanks. Manoli and Pallavi, do you have any thoughts on the sort of issues that we're going to face going forward and how we should address them? Do you think this could expand to have a much bigger impact on education in general? But if so, what are the risks that we face? Have you, perhaps Manoli first, have you had some experience of this in the work that you're doing? And
yeah, maybe not in the ethical point. I think we have to find a way to separate the linking point between enterprises and profit, money. I think we should have different type of organization in which we could engage students in solve problems for their community, for the NGO, for example. So more in material value in solving a challenge or designing the solution for a problem, for a social problem. That could be one way to make a diversity of the problems, mixing more enterprise problems like computing or designing for technology, but also, and this is the experience that we have, more community, more close to your community. What changes you can do as a school community to change specific values or specific actions close to you, more social orientated. That could be one way of doing it, mixing.
Yeah, so that's actually really useful, because so partly what we're trying to do here is suggest a switch around in the curriculum from what it feels as if it's walking backwards into the future, repeating and transmitting what we've learned in the past. But if we switch around to a challenge-based curriculum, we could be challenges that are widely agreed to be important. And one way to do that is, for example, to work with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, but also with local community groups. And this is actually where Huawei and BT came in our early discussions. Jonathan, you were there, and Pallavi, would also know that the mission was very much bridging the digital divide. So these major global issues that everyone agrees are important, and we could structure these interventions around that. What do you think, Pallavi? Would that make sense in terms of, for example, Huawei's involvement, which I have to say in some other areas in England and America has become controversial, but I don't think it is in education. But how do you deal with that as part of the ICT Academy of Huawei?
So we've been carrying out some virtual work experience pilots as well, actually, we put through for the ICT Academy students. And I absolutely agree with everything Jonathan and Joe has said up to now. The logistics of getting students in physically into the workplace, it's difficult because there's a lot of work involved in practical terms for myself, for sure. I know when I'm working with students, and it also takes me away from the tasks that I have to do, which I then have to do, outside of work hours because I'm supporting students. Now, trying to, through the simulated virtual work experience pilot, I think we can accommodate, from industry's perspective, we can accommodate a lot more students this way, and they have the benefit of actually doing some kind of work experience and engaging with employers over a certain period of time. That's agreed. But I think this is the way forward. Personally, what I think should happen is that for all of our mainstream courses, maybe we should be looking at including this as a, compulsory type of activity. This type of activity will force schools almost to engage with employers and make sure that link, grows, and get employers in on a regular basis to talk to young people. The earlier we start, the better it will be for our young people to be able to make the right decisions going forward. We forget, we've been in employment for a long time, we forget how frightening it is for a young person when they're changing from the world of academia into, from education into employment. It's frightening. They don't know what to expect. And this will, at some level, help them with that, experience and understand how, the real world operates, what people are saying, what they're doing, how they respond. And I think it makes all of the difference. It really does build their confidence. So I think it should be made compulsory. The only risk that I see is that schools, not all schools participating. So that's why I feel that if it was made compulsory, it would be a lot more useful for young people.
Well, we better talk to various government bodies about that. It sounds like a good idea. To me, but I think there's so many other issues we could discuss, but I think it might be time to draw this to a close. And I do hope, thanks very much for everyone's participation in the chat. This will be recorded. The video will be on our YouTube channel, so we can certainly invite comments there, but also get in touch with us. Do subscribe to DEFI and do send us any further questions. Barry, should I ask them again to make sure that we've signed up to share details and agreed to collaboration? We will definitely be sharing. Somebody asked if we could share the PowerPoints, and I think that'll be reasonable, but I suppose I should check with Louis and Alison. So can I ask Louis and Alison to, I don't know, perhaps say a few words at this point, and also please answer yes to this attendee list question so that we can share some ideas together.
Thanks, Rupert. Now, just to say, we'll make the slides available in the email that goes around after, and just to say thanks everybody for attending. It was a superb discussion from the panel, so thanks for all the panel contributors and also the rich chat discussion, which I've enjoyed reading here. So thank you everybody for contributing.
Yes, thanks everybody, and especially the panel members, and I should say especially, of course, Huawei and British BT. Sorry, I keep saying British Telecom because I'm old. It's BT now, isn't it? For supporting this project, and perhaps you could also support it a bit going forward, because we are looking for funding. So if you know anybody with lots of money, just send them my way. That'll be great. And Alison, do you want to say a few words? And what have you found this useful feedback for our project going forward, which I hope you'll be able to take on, the social enterprise?
Yeah, it's been really useful. And just to add to what Louis was saying, the comments and the discussion in the chat's been very interesting, feeding in as well as a on a side. So thank you for everyone for participating verbally and textually. It's been great.
Well, I do hope this is the beginning of something that has an impact, because that's our role, to do implementation work, not just to find out if things work or not, but to try and make a positive difference. And of course, we need your support to do that. So thanks again to everybody. And I guess we should go now. So thank you all. Is that bye?
Thank you.